So, who am I? I'm Pietro Paganini, and I'm your host today of this wonderful event that the Austrian Economics and the Free Market Roadshow has put together to present something that has really intrigued me when I was asked to chair this event. First of all, I decided to do it because Barbara is, as usual, engaged and fully involved with it. But when I understood the topic, that is a roadmap towards the Europe we want. And of course, with my think tank, Competere, we have signed and we fully support the roadmap that has been put together. But, I have to be the chair today, so I have to be extremely objective, independent, and try to stimulate the debate. And today we do this, we present the roadmap to the entire world because we are here live on Zoom, but we are also live on Facebook, and we are being recorded. So this event will be staying online forever. And today we're engaging the roadmap towards the Europe we want, together with Barbara, that is the director and founder of the Free Market Roadshow, and also with, and I'm very delighted to have Lord Matt Ridley, who is a writer, and his last book is How Innovation Works and How it flourishes in and why it flourishes in freedom. And of course, on the Free Market Roadshow, you can find the full bio of Lord Matt Ridley and of Barbara if you don't know who they are, but I'm sure you, and I assume you know who they are. But let me start right immediately because this is an interesting debate. And of course, we're in the middle of the discussion for the recovery fund. We're in the discussion for the European mechanism. In Italy, we want the famous MES, what we translate as the European mechanism. And we are desperately looking for money in this time of pandemic, but we have also discussed the crisis that Europe is going through. And don't forget, and let me allow me to advertise this event that with the Austrian Economics and the Free Market Roadshow we organized for tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central European time. That is about the crisis of liberal democracies, and we're doing this with an incredible panel with Mr. Fantini, with Mr. Graham Watson, former members of European Parliament, and Daniel Caddick from the ELF, the European Liberal Foundation. It's tomorrow at 6 p.m. But now let me go straight before going to Lord Matt Ridley. Apologize because I will start with the Queen of Austria, and that's Barbara Kolm. Floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Pietro, also for your nice introduction, and of course also for promoting our other events that we co-host, or actually that we are doing together, and that have seen a lot of publicity recently, not only because of the moderator, but of course because of the topics and because of our speakers. So it's a privilege to join you today together with Lord Ridley and to discuss one of the outcomes, one of the many outcomes and outputs of the Free Market Roadshow 2020. As you mentioned already, the roadshow this year was totally innovative. It was completely, it had to be completely changed from a real life event. Within 4 days, my entire team, or our entire team, was able to move it to an online event. So instead of touring 40 countries in Europe, but live with a couple of hundred speakers, we had to do this online, and but thanks to all our partners who were very, very flexible and also believe in spontaneous orders and market processes, we were able to pull off the entire Free Market Roadshow. As a matter of fact, we had many more events and many more viewers and listeners because of the format, the online format. And I also have to thank all our more than 100 partners, think tanks, universities who co-hosted and who joined. And of course, without our partners and sponsors, this would not be possible. So another thanks goes to them. But you can all see the list of people involved at our website, the Free Market Roadshow, freemarket-rs.com. So this is something that you all know. But this year's outcome, as I mentioned, is a roadmap towards the Europe we want. And what is it? We have, after our many discussions and events, we sat together with the leaders of the various think tanks and groups and put together the topics that were most important to all our viewers, to all our listeners, and to our speakers. And briefly, I will give you just the headlines. One is debureaucratization via e-government. The second point that is true and really important to everybody is tax competition and fiscal sustainability. The third point is a pro-innovation mindset. The fourth point is cash and crypto should be kings. And fifth point is welfare and rights for the 21st century. And I think those points, and the declaration, by the way, is of course online at the website. All the think tanks, all the partner institutions who were part of the Free Market Roadshow have signed it, and many more. A couple of professors, or actually many professors of the universities that were our hosts, also signed it. Business people signed it, managers, politicians, all across Europe. And I think it's something that we need to push more forward, because as you mentioned, what is going on right now in Brussels is kind of living in a central hub. It's central planning. It's less innovative than we think it should be. And of course, it's very bureaucratized. And this is the first point. And I'm gonna read the first point. It's the debureaucratization via e-government. And we have learned from the best. And this is why we put those 5 points together. When Matt Ridley back in Estonia started, was elected and became prime minister right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Matt Ridley, as a very young man, introduced e-government in Estonia. From then it was spread across the Baltic countries and also to many other countries across the world. And this is an example, a shining example of how one can reduce bureaucracy, can also use more direct democracy, and can be more effective and efficient. And we have learned from Henry Schneider, our colleague from Switzerland, that if you cut bureaucracy, then you can save not only a lot of money, but you can really push your GDP per capita tremendously. And they have run tests, and Switzerland is very creative on that. We should copy paste that as well. So this is the point that is on this first topic. The second point is tax competition via fiscal sustainability. Here, and given the COVID times where budgets don't matter at all anymore, and where you have to help by all means and whatever costs around. So when people, or when fiscal discipline, budgetary discipline is completely thrown overboard, I think we should look back and think of what it means to live to your means and not overspend. And then, of course, this goes hand in hand with tax competition. Tax competition across Europe should be a very dear topic to everybody of us. Without tax competition, we will end up in places with only high tax rates. And it's the race to the growth and not the race to the bottom. And we should actually argue for the race to the bottom. The lower the tax rates are, the better, the more competitive our business and, of course, labor locations are. Because if our labor market is now falling apart more or less due to the lockdown crisis, we will have to outperform other places in the world. I mean, after all, the new G7 or G8 is not just France against Germany, against Great Britain. It's Europe competing with other parts of the world. And there we should also look at those places in Europe who can compete with other places in Europe. And from history, we have always learned that if regions compete with each other, we were economically much better off in Europe. So if economic entities are larger than political ones, historically economic growth kicked in, and we should keep that in mind. The next point I would like to make, and of course there is a whole bunch of literature pro-tax competition across the world. Then, of course, the next point is a pro-innovation mindset. Sir Ridley will, of course, talk about innovation later on, so I will keep this point very short. But, you know, policymakers actually need to completely change their mindset and understand that innovation, new products, services, and business models must, in principle, always be allowed. So we should be able to be creative and not feel the burden of bureaucracy and of hindering. Patents and IP rights are very important to us, and if we allow that, we will be able to also have a better Europe, a better understanding of Europe. The next point, and I will not touch upon the role of innovation and why it is important, but we can also quote Hayek, who told us how creativity works in the individual and how by this creative processes we create productive and better societies. The next point I would like to briefly touch upon is cash and crypto should be kings. And here I simply read the point, the idea of the declaration, because we are frightened by the periodic discussions and trial balloons launched by European authorities in order to abolish cash. And I think everybody should have the choice whether to use cash in what form ever, whether it's online or whether it's coins or whatever it is. But cash, I think, is very important to keep and to allow people. So a cashless society would not solve any problems. It would actually bring a series of very real problems to individuals and companies. And the first one has to do with privacy and personal freedom, and the second is how vulnerably cashless societies make us vis-a-vis disruption such as power failures or communication breakdowns. So we should keep that in mind. And as we have seen what can happen because of a health crisis that nobody predicted and nobody would have thought possible, that, you know, our hands are tied in Europe and we are unable to solve this as a Europe, as one union. As a matter of fact, we have not even solved or have no common ideas how to solve the consequences of the lockdowns, the economic consequences. We are not even discussing those, but we should. And the last point I would like to make, or we in the declaration have made, is the welfare and rights for the 21st century. So Europeans have to regain the ability to protect themselves and their families. And freedom of association is essential to this. And as we saw this during the COVID measures taken in several countries, that individual freedom is totally reduced again, or that certain things are pushed on us that we definitely do not want, because we are freedom lovers and we would like to take our own choices, and we should be allowed to do that and take government at what it is, provide the rule of law, and stick to that. And I think this is something that, especially in the 21st century, should be dearer to us, because we have forgotten about what individual freedom really means. And we will only find out when it's taken away, and then it is too late. So we have to be very careful, very precautious, and make sure that those legal foundations, those values that Europe is based on, stay safe, and that we can all live with those. And I just would tell you, you can sign this this declaration. It's you can read the roadmap towards a Europe we want. It's the common denominator. There are, of course, many more topics that we have discussed, but it's, if you have groups from across Europe, and it's more, as I mentioned, more than 100 think tanks and university groups and business groups. So you have many hats that you that people wear, but this is the common denominator, and this is based on the European values that are competition, that is the achievement principle, that is self-responsibility. And I invite you all to join us, and thank you for giving me the time here. And I'm looking forward to Sir Ridley's talk on innovation now.
Thank you, Barbara, so much. And let me join you in this appeal to ask everybody who's following us on Facebook, here on Zoom, or who is watching us in the future, being this event recorded, to sign this document, to sign this declaration. But, you know, next to the signature is also to spread the voice around of the great content that is here. And Barbara said one important matter, I think, that is what, to me, is probably the most important aspect is, we want to improve Europe. We want to change Europe. That's the reasoning behind. Barbara, before going to Lord Ridley, and we make him wait for a few more minutes, kindly wait for us. Barbara, I read this, you know, I sign it. I'm 100% with you on this. But the question is, when I read some words that you mentioned, debureaucratization, you know, innovation, a tax competitive system, that's great, but how are we going to make this happen?
Well,
big question, huh?
Of course, it's a big question, but if we look on how Europe, the European Union was built, and the idea behind it was not only the peace-saving idea, but it was also the economic idea and the four European freedoms, the free movement of people, services and goods and money. These are the things that should matter, those open borders. During this COVID lockdowns, we've seen European borders get closed again. I mean, this is not the Europe we want, and this is definitely not helpful. And besides, you know, I think it's time to rethink and put the reset button. We were unable to find a common strategy in Europe to solve this this health issue. And if you think, especially at the beginning, there were things where countries did not help, did not give aid to others because of selfishness, and or because of a lack of understanding. Put it this way, I think this is the easier way to give these excuses. But it's but all those things give us evidence that we need to reform not only Brussels, but put the reset button for Europe, for the next generation of Europeans in their mindset. And I'm not talking about nation states. This is far away from our thinking. I think the subsidiarity principle should be also remembered. Things that can be solved on a local level should be solved on a local level. Things that can be solved on the regional level should be solved there. Things that can be solved on a national level should be put up there, and after that we go up to the supranational level in the European Union. But this is the Europe with the European regions at center, and where this is something that we should keep in mind and look at what our founding fathers have said about it. And no matter whether it was Schuman, de Gasperi, or whether it was Monnet or the conservatives, I think the common understanding was one continent cooperating, coordinating, dividing labor, as the Austrian economists say, dividing labor. And I think this is a very positive solution. It's a lot of work, but it can be done.
Thank you, Barbara, as usual, to clarify and also to engage and motivate us. Let me turn to Lord Ridley finally, and thanks for joining us. I'm very delighted. We talk about Europe and let me start with the provocation, but that brings you into the debate. You are in the UK, you are in Newcastle, and of course, it's a very easy statement I can make. Why are you interested in pushing and promoting this declaration? And by the way, this declaration is available at the Free Market Roadshow. So read why supporting this declaration?
Well, thank you, Pietro, very much. And thank you, Barbara, for that fantastic and inspiring talk. And I am very much in favor of this declaration. It seems to me to have all the right features that we should be pressing for in Europe. We do this against the background of imminent Brexit, of course. So in a sense, this is more your conversation than mine, but I don't think that's really right, because we are still geographically going to be part of Europe. We are going to be part of the conversation among nations in Europe. And we want to see the European Union thrive. And if it were as competitive and dynamic as this agenda suggests it could be, then I think you'd have Britain reapplying to join quite quickly. So that's worth bearing in mind, if you want us back, which you may not, of course. What I thought I'd do, though, is talk a little bit about innovation, the topic of my new book, and what it is, why it happens to us and not to other animals, and why it happens in some places and not others, and in some industries and not others, and draw out the features of it, and then tie that into the question of how it is connected to freedom and to the issues that you raise in your declaration and in the roadmap. The first thing to say is that innovation really matters. It is an incredibly important topic. It is probably by far the most important feature of the modern world. That is to say, when I was born, more than half of the world lived in extreme poverty. And on the same measure today, less than 9% of the world lives at that level of poverty. That has never happened in a single lifetime before. That destruction of poverty, and not replacement with prosperity, but replacement with less poverty at least. And the reason for that is not because we've got more people or more labor or more capital or accumulation of money or something like that. It's because of innovation. It's because of new tools, new rules, new ways of doing things that have enabled us to serve each other better, to work for each other more productively. And if you think that that can be taken for granted, that innovation will always happen and that it's delivering the fruits of prosperity to all of us at the same rate and all the time into the future, then I think this year should have woken you up and told you that we need more innovation, not less. We need it to go faster, not slower. Because if we had developed a vaccine platform so that we were ready to develop a vaccine for a virus at short notice, for any disease or for any coronavirus even, before this year, then think how differently this year would have been. Or if we had developed point-of-care diagnostic devices for picking up the DNA or the RNA of viruses, again, so that, you know, at the bedside, you could tell within 5 minutes whether somebody had a disease. Again, think how different this year would have been. Now, both of those could have happened 5 or even 10 years ago. We've had the genomic knowledge to do this kind of thing for some time now. The reason they haven't is largely because of the obstacles we put in the way of innovators. And just to put it at its most brutal, if you wanted to develop a diagnostic device of the kind that I've mentioned, you would have had to spend 3, maybe 4 years getting licensing approval for that device to be used in hospitals or in societies at large. That's sort of how long a medical device takes to license. If you instead had said, I'm going to develop a video game, it would have taken you no time at all. You could have gone straight to market. So as a result, I think we have diverted the energies of entrepreneurs away from diagnostic devices and into video games in the last 10 years. That is a mistake we now see. So far from the world having too much innovation, going too fast, being too difficult for us to cope with. Actually, we haven't had enough. So what is innovation? Well, it's more than invention. Invention is just the development of a new device. We say in English, if you build a better mousetrap, the world will beat a path to your door. That's not true. If you build a better mousetrap, you still have to make it affordable, reliable, available to everybody. And that's the process of innovation. It's much more than just inventing a new device. You have to, if you examine what happens in the stories of innovation, from steam engines to search engines, from vaccines to vaping, you find that a lot of the work actually happens in the private sector, in businesses, turning these things into reliable and affordable devices. And we disguise this in the way we tell stories about innovation, because we tell stories about heroic inventors as if they were geniuses, and it's all just falls into place. It's not the case. It's a collaborative effort that happens later. What is more, innovators often change direction. They often set out to invent one thing and end up inventing another. I call this serendipity, and it's a very important feature of innovation. If you examine the stories of innovators, often they had to change tack, change their minds, change direction. Kevlar, Teflon, the Post-it note, these are all devices or materials that were invented by someone looking for something completely different. And they thought they had failed. In the case of the Post-it note, the people at 3M were looking for a permanent glue for paper. They found a temporary glue for paper, and they said, well, this is no use, we'll throw it away. And then one of them, Art Fry, said, this could be quite useful in my hymn book at choir practice tonight. And the Post-it note was born, and they used yellow paper, so we did. Innovation is more gradual than we think. It's a process, not a moment. We tend to get obsessed with the disruption that comes from a new technology, but that new technology always had a very long, slow build-up, and it always had a long post-history too, when it expanded and improved. You can see this in something like Moore's law, the graph that shows the improvement of computing over time since the 1960s. It's an incremental, steady progress. Every 18 months, computing is twice as good, roughly. And even though we knew that back in the 1960s, we couldn't jump ahead and say, well, in that case, we'll make it 10 times as good next year instead of twice as good. We had to invent each technology to get to the next one. And this is true of the motor car or whatever technology you look at. It has to move through a series of steps. It can't leap way into the future in one go. And related to that, innovation is evolutionary. It's very important to understand that it's a process of descent with modification, that there are parents, there are pedigrees. The motor car, the early motor car, looked like it was the product of a mating between a steam engine, a locomotive, and a horse carriage, with maybe a little bit of an illicit affair with a bicycle thrown in. This is what happens in technology. It evolves in exactly the same way. And just like in evolution, it's a bottom-up phenomenon, not a top-down phenomenon. It emerges unbidden from the way we do the way we interact with the world, rather than is directed by clever people from above. There's a wonderful word which I used in a previous book, which is the skyhook. I got it from Daniel Dennett, and it comes from an anecdote about an early aircraft in World War I, and the ground controller said, "Please, can you stay up there for an hour till we need you?" And he said, "I haven't got fuel for an hour. This craft is not fitted with sky hooks. I cannot hook myself to the sky." Well, sky hooks are what we tend to invoke when we think that human beings are in charge of processes. We think that for example, the Soviet Union assumed that in order to feed the country, you had to put someone in charge of feeding the country. We now understand that if you want to feed Paris, as Frédéric Bastiat said, you let the market find out what kind of food you need, where it needs to be, at what time, and in what place, and in what quantities. And just as in evolution, innovation is a recombinant phenomenon. It takes existing technologies and combines them in new ways to make new technologies. Almost every technology that you possess, I guarantee, is a combination of other technologies. And of course, Hayek and people understood this brilliantly when they pointed out that, as Leonard Read put it, a pencil is made by 1 million people collaborating, but none of them know how to make a pencil. It's the combination of minds that achieves this thing. And indeed, innovation is a team sport. It is a collaborative exercise. It is not an individual pursuit. Again, we tend to tell the stories about inventors as if they are, clever people who go and sit in an ivory tower and have clever thoughts and then come out with a machine. It doesn't work like that. There's a rather beautiful illustration of this, which is that in December 1903, there were 2 different attempts to launch an airplane into the air for the first time on the east coast of North America. One was from a guy called Samuel Langley, who was a brilliant astronomer. He had an enormous grant from the US government. He was very clever, so he consulted nobody. He went off and sat alone and did his drawings in secret, and then built the machine with all this enormous amount of money that he'd got from the US government, and he launched it from the roof of a houseboat on the Potomac River in front of a big audience, and it went 20 feet and crashed into the water. 10 days later in North Carolina, 2 humble bicycle mechanics from Ohio achieved what Langley had failed to achieve, the Wright brothers, and they did so by drawing upon the ideas of other people. They had relentlessly corresponded with and read and experimented with the ideas of other people, particularly someone called Lawrence Hargrave in Australia and somebody called Octave Chanute in Chicago, who had and then they'd done their own experiments with gliders and so on. They understood that it was a process of trial and error that you need to do to achieve innovation, that it wasn't a matter of solving the problem in your head and then building it. Thomas Edison famously said, I haven't failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. And what he meant by that was that the genius of the innovator is to try again, and to fail and fail again, because the more you fail, the more you're likely to succeed. So he actually experimented to improve his light bulb with 6,000 different types of plants before he found a kind of Japanese bamboo whose fibers would make the perfect filament, which would make a light bulb reliable. The problem was how to make a light bulb that would stay burning for more than an hour or 2. And that was how he did it, not by thinking it through, but by just trying lots of different things. Now, there's a weird phenomenon which the light bulb beautifully illustrates, which is that you get simultaneous invention. You get lots of different people inventing the same technology at the same time. 21 different people invented the light bulb at the same time. There was Edison in America, there was Lodygin in Russia, there was Swan here in England, etc., etc. And they were independent of each other. They came up with it. And this seems weird. I mean, was there some deity in the sky who reached down and implanted the idea in all their minds? No, the point was it was ripe. It was ready to go. The technologies that you need to combine to make a light bulb had come to the point where it was sort of inevitable people would put them together. And you can see this more clearly with a more recent example. The search engine was invented in the early 1990s by lots of different people independently. It's the most important invention of the internet. It's the best way of making money out of the internet, which is why Google is so valuable. And it's sort of obvious that it was going to happen. That somebody would invent the search engine. And if Larry Page had never met Sergey Brin, we would still have search engines. Somebody else would have invented Google. They wouldn't have called it Google, but that somebody else would have invented it. And yet, if you go back and read what people are saying in the 1980s about the internet, nobody predicts the importance of search engines. In fact, nobody even predicts search engines. In fact, Page and Brin didn't even think they were inventing a search engine. They thought they were cataloging the internet. It was only about halfway through that they realized what they had stumbled upon. And this is a really weird aspect of innovation for me. The asymmetric nature of its predictability. Looking forward, it's fantastic. Sorry, looking backward, it's fantastically predictable. You know, we can say, once you've invented the internet, you're bound to invent the search engine. Once you've invented electricity, you're bound to invent the light bulb. But looking forward, it's not like that. We find it very, very hard to predict. And there are some very, very clever people who said some very, very stupid things about the future of technology. give you one example. Paul Krugman, who won a Nobel Prize for economics, said in 1998 that by 2005, it will have become clear that the internet's impact on the economy is no greater than the fax machines. Now, that's a very, very foolish thing to have said, but let's let him off the hook a bit, because actually in 1998, e-commerce was faltering. It was failing to fulfill its early promise. It was turning into just a sort of weird place where a few people did slightly odd online auctions. Bezos had not yet worked his magic to give us all what we want, which is online ordering and retail. And indeed, there was about to be a huge recession among e-commerce companies. So it looked a wise thing at the time. What's going on there, I think, is something that I call Amara's hype cycle. Roy Amara in the 1960s said, we underestimate the impact of a new technology in the long run, but we overestimate it in the short run. It's an S-shaped curve. Nothing much happens in the first 10 years after you've invented something. I mean, think of blockchain now. Has blockchain fulfilled the promise of Satoshi Nakamoto 10 or 12 years ago? No, I don't think it has. And it'll probably disappoint us for another 10 years, but it might then have a spectacular impact after that. The relationship between innovation and science is much misunderstood. Most politicians assume that science is the father of innovation, that you fund science and the result is applied science, then technology. And that does sometimes happen, but just as often the opposite happens. Somebody invents a technology which then has to be explained by scientists, and it leads to scientific breakthroughs. So for example, the science of thermodynamics came out of the steam engine rather than the other way around. The study of immunology came long after the invention of vaccines. The study of chemistry came after the invention of dyes, and so on. So, and if you take a very modern example, CRISPR gene editing technology invented within the last 10 years, subject of a Nobel Prize for Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier this month. This is an academic discovery in university science departments, but it is based on work in the French yogurt industry 10 years before, understanding how bacteria get infected with viruses and how they keep these libraries of DNA sequences to recognize when they're defending themselves. Another myth about innovation is that it destroys jobs. We've been worried about this for 200 years. In the 1960s, we thought computers in factories were going to lead to mass unemployment. Today, we think artificial intelligence will lead to unemployment among doctors and lawyers, and that's a much more serious affair, of course, than unemployment among factory workers. So we're very worried about it. It's nonsense. It's not going to happen. Innovation leads to more employment, not less, although it does enable us to have more leisure, to have shorter work hours, to have longer time in education, longer time in retirement. That is indeed one of the fruits. So we share out the leisure that we get from innovation more equitably by working for just 10% of our lives. If you live to 80 and you spend half your life in education and retirement and the other half working, and you work a 39-hour week, then do the arithmetic. You'll do about 10% of your life at work. It's a very small percentage to achieve a good lifestyle. But you know, we are going to create new opportunities to work for each other through innovation. If we make social care much cheaper by using artificial intelligence, then there'll be more opportunities for people to do social care because social carers will be more productive and they will be more affordable, and so on. Another myth of innovation is that it is going to run out because of diminishing returns, because of lack of resources in the world. You know, at some point, you can't have infinite growth in a finite world, as David Attenborough likes to say. That's not true. You can have infinite growth in a finite world because you can do more with less. The next innovation can cause you to use fewer resources, not more. And that happens all the time. We use 68% less land to produce a given amount of food as we did 50 years ago. We use less gas to make more electricity than we did before. We use less aluminium to make a drinks can than we did. We use less water to grow a crop than we did, etc., etc. So we're doing more from less all the time. And think of your your mobile phone. Think of how many devices have disappeared into it. You know, your calendar and your flashlight and your compass and your maps and your diary and all these things that used to take up a lot of space on your desk have now disappeared into one small device. So that brings me to the secret source of innovation, the thing that makes it happen in some places more than others. And that, in the end, boils down to one word: freedom, liberty. The freedom of the consumer to express his or her wishes, his or her preferences, but also the freedom of the entrepreneur to change direction, to invest, to do something new, to try and fail and start again. All these freedoms are fantastically important. The freedom to move, the freedom to say, I don't like this regime, I'm going to another one. And when you think about it, the most innovative places were often fragmented governments, the Italian city-states in the Renaissance, the fragmented countries of Europe in the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. I mean, you know, Gutenberg was born in Mainz, but he moved to Strasbourg because there was a more congenial regime there. The American states, very different policies in different states. California hit upon a perfect combination of rules to help people, but today it is very much less helpful to entrepreneurs, and a lot of entrepreneurs are now leaving California and going to Texas. Elon Musk is threatening to do that, for example. Contrast that with the Ottoman Empire or the Mughal Empire or even the Roman Empire. Not very innovative at all, despite having enormous free trade areas, enormous amounts of money, enormous amounts of infrastructure. Nonetheless, empires are not good at innovation. And I think China tells us a really interesting story here. Because if you look at what happened in China 1,000 years ago, there was a dynasty called the Song dynasty, which was very devolutionary. Very decentralizing. It allowed local officials and local merchants to make their own decisions. And basically it allowed entrepreneurs to be very free. If you wanted to set up a business, you could. If you wanted to go abroad and trade, you could. And it had very different policies in different parts of the empire. That was the period when China was at its most inventive, when it had something very close to an industrial revolution, when it invented clocks and gunpowder and compasses and printed paper money and the printing press and all these different things. It was an extraordinary period of technological and cultural flourishing and of prosperity. Then came the Mongol invasion, and then after that, the Ming emperors took over. The Ming took a totally different approach. They took a centralized approach. The Mandarin in the capital decided what was the right thing for a merchant to do with his time, with his money, with his ingenuity. He decided whether he could leave his home village. You had to get permission from a civil servant to move. It abolished trade. Foreign trade was stopped, quite literally. And what happened was that, of course, China sank into poverty from prosperity and stayed that way for a very long time. And Mao Zedong repeated that experiment with disastrous results. Deng Xiaoping reversed the experiment and brought in extraordinary economic liberty. That sounds odd to say that there was ever any liberty in modern China. There was never any political liberty. You were never at liberty to invent a new political party, but you were at liberty to start a new business, to invent a new gadget, to start a new form of trade, to do a new experiment. In fact, you were more free to do that than in America or Europe, because you had none of the petty bureaucratic rules that stood in your way. You were effectively operating in an environment of what Adam Tira calls permissionless innovation. The only place in the West where we emulated that was in the digital industry. Thanks to a series of laws passed during the Clinton administration in Washington, America effectively tried a massive libertarian experiment with online commerce, basically saying you didn't, intellectual property didn't matter. There were no rules and regulations. You could do what you like. You could set up a business. You could be a social media platform. You weren't a publisher. You know, there were all these libertarian rules. Some of them have got us into trouble since, as we're experiencing at the moment. But nonetheless, that was what led to the takeoff of e-commerce, was a tremendous liberalization, a permissionless innovation space. And that's why so much of recent innovation has been in digital and software areas. And so little has happened everywhere else. I mean, where are the flying cars, the routine space travel, the supersonic airliners, the personal jetpacks that we were promised when I was a boy? They haven't happened because it's much harder to innovate in those areas than it is. And Peter Thiel put it beautifully. He said, we wanted flying cars, we got 140 characters. A lesson for Europe there. Why did I vote for Brexit? Because much as I love the idea of a free trade area in Europe, I do not like the idea of central harmonization, of saying the rules must be the same everywhere. I want to see tax competition. I want to see regulation competition, because that's the way you get innovation. That's the way it happens. And the failure of Europe to produce even a single digital giant to challenge Amazon and Facebook and Google and their Chinese equivalents is very stark. It's very extraordinary. And if you look at specific examples of how innovators have tried and failed in Europe, I'm thinking of James Dyson with his bagless vacuum cleaner and the lobbying against him by the incumbent industries. I'm thinking of biotechnology and the failure of plant biotechnology in the European Union to get going, and therefore leaving us dependent on older technologies like chemicals in agriculture. Then I'm afraid you come to the conclusion that Europe, as it is being more and more centralized and less subsidiarity is being allowed, to take up a point that Barbara made, is not a conducive space for innovation. Will Britain do better on its own? I hope so. I'm not yet terribly confident. The instinct to tell people what to do has got worse during this pandemic. Far from learning the lesson that we should allow innovators to flourish, we seem to have learned the lesson that it's possible by decree to tell people what they can and can't do without even proper parliamentary scrutiny. I'm terrified by what we have done to our liberties in the last few months. In World War II, Britain passed a series of laws which specifically said this law lasts until the war is over, and then we will return you to liberty. And many of those laws were still being used to make rules into the 1980s. And I'm afraid the same is going to be true now. That the police will not easily give up their powers received during this year to tell us what we can and can't do. So my argument is that innovation is the parent of prosperity and the child of freedom. And we need to find the conditions under which it can flourish. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lord Ridley. We went over time, I tell you the truth.
I apologize.
I guess I was at least extremely excited. I also saw that our audience, instead of going down, went up. And that's an incredible change for us. Usually after 30 minutes, it goes down, but you made a change in this. At least you can say with incredible confidence that you are attracting people and not losing them. I was very much excited about hearing you because you brought me back to my doctorate, my PhD that was exactly on innovation processes. So you kind of refresh with incredible rhetorical capacity my knowledge. So thank you so much. We don't have much time, but I would have a lot of questions for you because you touch upon several interesting topics. I have one though in my mind, and then of course I have invited everybody in our audience, not on Facebook, because if you're on Facebook, you can't make questions directly to us. If you are on Zoom, you can. I know it's a limitation, but then you are very welcome to join our event on Zoom. My question, and again, I would like everybody else to ask a few questions because we don't have much time, but please do so. You talk about freedom, but exactly in the UK as well in Italy, there's a bunch of authors. There are, even featured in the New York Times. There's particularly an Italian one that's teaching in Oxford, I think, or Cambridge, that wrote a book about the entrepreneurial government or the entrepreneurial state. And the idea there is that innovation is driven by government. That clashes, I guess, with your vision. Any take on this?
Yes, I think you're referring to Mariana Mazzucato.
Yes. Yeah,
And,
I didn't mention her, but yeah.
I've just been reading the new book by Alberto Mingardi and Deirdre McCloskey in response to Mariana Mazzucato's argument. And Mariana makes some good points, but I simply don't buy her main argument, which is that most innovation has happened from the state. It's just not true. For a start, the state didn't even try to do innovation before the 20th century. And in America and Britain, it didn't even try really until the Second World War, a little more in France and Germany. And so it would be odd to make the argument that the private sector was capable of innovation in the era of, vaccines and steam engines and electricity, but not in the era of biotechnology and digital electronics. And then if you look at the specific examples she gives, I mean, she talks about railways, depending on state innovation. Well, railways were a private sector innovation. They were invented by George Stephenson, basically. And it is true that there are technologies which were developed in the public sector with public sector money, which then spilled over and became further developed in the private sector. GPS, or even the internet itself, which started in DARPA. But I think this makes the mistake of confusing the original invention with innovation, because innovation is a very difficult process, very expensive, very time consuming, and if you think that the original inventor deserves all the credit, it's a bit like a beaver taking credit for the Hoover Dam, saying, look, I invented dams, I'm a beaver, so you should pay me a royalty for every dam you build today on a river, which is obviously, nonsensical. Yes, the state takes 40% of our money off us, and it would be a shame if it put none of that back into innovation, because otherwise we could be doing 40% more innovation than we are. So yes, it's a good thing if the state tries to encourage innovation. But as Terence Keeley has argued, it is simply not the case that you need, that no innovator will ever try and innovate because he can't guarantee that he'll reap the rewards, and therefore the state has to pay for it. Because if that was the case, then, as I say, why was the locomotive invented? Why was vaping invented the other day? But, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't buy that argument, and I think it's particularly her argument that it's directional, that the government knows what we should be inventing and invents it. I think that's a huge mistake. We did not expect the internet. We did not foresee most of the technologies. The mobile phone, everybody thought it was going to be a toy of the rich. It turned out to be very useful to people in India and Africa. So the wise government bureaucrat who knows where we want to go in innovation simply does not exist.
And I fully agree with you on this. I said I would have been no partisan on this, but I totally agree. We're getting to the conclusion. I see no question at the moment, but I leave the floor to Barbara for eventually a question or the goodbye. I just want to remind you quickly that this event is being recorded, so it will be available online on the Free Market Roadshow, and that we see each other tomorrow at 6 p.m. with the debate on liberal democracies and the crisis we're going through. Barbara, to you.
Well, thank you, Pietro, and thanks a lot, Matt. So really, this was really fantastic. And as you know, you have a standing invitation in Vienna, and I just got a couple of information on, or actually WhatsApps and info on my cell. People would like to see you more often in our spheres and debate with you. And I would simply like to add one more thing, and you also touched upon it. It was Hayek who told us how knowledge is created in society, and eventually he was also awarded the Nobel Prize in economics for that. And given his talk, or having presented his talk there in Stockholm, he was also reminding us of being humble, and he was talking about those people who think that they know everything, and we should not. We know that we don't. That there is no such thing as full information, and that we need those inventors who try and experiment constantly. And thank you. I just wanted to mention Hayek again, because I think this ties into what we as Austrian economists all believe in. And again, no question, but I think you should probably comment on that more. Yes. At either the next event, or I don't know if
You're quite right. I did mention Hayek once in my remarks, but you're absolutely right. And thank goodness for the invention of Austrian economics. I mean, for me, the discovery of Hayek's essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society, was like a light going on. You know, I mean, it was extraordinary to be able to say, aha, yes, I see the world differently. You know, so you're absolutely right that those insights. And one thing I have tried to do is rescue the ordinary person from this sort of theory that either bureaucrats or geniuses are necessary for invention. I mean, people are constantly telling me the whole point about having a bigger population is that you're more likely to have a very clever person. And I say 100 clever people in a room who don't talk to each other is worse than 100 stupid people who do talk to each other. You know, that and ordinary people can achieve so much. That's one of the reasons I don't like the word creativity, because I think it implies some kind of special juice that somebody has and somebody else has not got. I think to be a great innovator, you need hard work, open-mindedness, collaborative spirit, all these kind of things, which anybody can have. I'll stop there. I apologize for taking so much time again.
Thank you so much, Lord Ridley, and thank you so much, Barbara. So let me end to the conclusion again, reminding that this event is being recorded, and thanks for everybody to follow us and for following us. And again, really, Lord Ridley, please join us again. And Barbara, let's organize something, you know, on innovation, because it was, I would say, an incredible lecture. I was not expecting this to be so exciting, and again, bringing me back to my doctorate thesis. So I really enjoy and appreciated it very much. There were a lot of questions, and I'm sure there's a bunch of comments that just came in from our audience. And again, thanks everybody for following us. And let me conclude with this, Mr. Ridley, since you mentioned freedom and the stupid people. Well, you know, during the 30s and the 40s, there was an Italian teacher that actually convinced Mussolini to follow her methodology. That was Maria Montessori. And, you know, I'm a strong Montessori advocate. And she had few stupid students in the room. And by giving them freedom, she made them smart people solving problems. So again, here we are. Thank you so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.